Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My mother named me Patrick Joseph White, and my beautiful wife, Kadina, outside there. The two of us make up Conspiracy Culture Bookstore. We've been in Toronto since 2006. We put an emphasis on subject matter and materials that are typically void from your mainstream controlled bookstores, i.e. Heather Reisman, i.e. Bilderberg Group. And we do a lot of these cool events. In the 11 plus years that we've been operating, we've produced over 110 of these types of shows. And we were fortunate enough to cross paths with Dr. Frank Albo originally back in 2009 when we had him at our bookstore to launch his first book, which was called The Hermetic Code. And as I previously stated, we've produced over 110 shows in our existence, and I will honestly say that the Hermetic Code presentation goes right up into the top 3 that I've ever attended, let alone ones that we've put on. All the ones throughout the years that we've been to and that have all crossed through the city, it was just so enthralling and fascinating. So when he contacted us and told us that he had a new book all about Illuminati architecture in Astana, so here we are. And Dr. Frank Albo is an architectural historian and a certified expert on communicating new streams of knowledge in relation to the built environment and the cultures of the past. He holds graduate degrees in ancient Near Eastern languages, Western esotericism, and the history of art, receiving his PhD from the University of Cambridge in 2012. His groundbreaking discoveries on the meanings encoded in public monuments, gardens, and cities have been published in numerous peer-reviewed journals, as well as in several radio, television, and documentary programs. With his comprehensive knowledge of world cultures, traditions, and beliefs, Dr. Albo has worked as a consultant for prominent museums and leading design firms. His client list includes the Canadian Museum for Human Rights and the Royal Alberta Museum. Over the past decade, Dr. Albo has led tours of the Manitoba Legislative Building, identifying concealed Masonic symbols, hidden hieroglyphs, and numerological codes, which have all escaped historians and visitors for nearly 100 years. And tonight, on November 11, 2017, Dr. Frank Albo graciously presents his pioneering work, Astana, Architecture, Myth, and Destiny, to you wonderful people. Thank you again for coming. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Frank Albo.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much for coming. It is a great privilege and honor to speak on behalf of this extraordinary capital, one that I was thoroughly enchanted from the start. If we could maybe turn down the lights, I'd like to give you an opportunity to fall in love with this extraordinary city, unlike any other capital ever built or conceived. What you'll come to appreciate is that this city is unlike any other on earth. Its buildings carry the memories and traditions of the world and the entire human family. Yet, for many, hundreds of thousands that is, it is the command center of global Freemasonry and widely dubbed the Illuminati capital of the world. Now, I propose in this talk, maybe stay with me for 70 minutes, that this is a very superficial reading of this capital. I argue that this capital contains a solution to the 3 greatest threats of our time: religious extremism, the proliferation of nuclear weapons, and the sustainability of the planet. So, what follows is not some routine history of a post-Soviet capital. Rather, it is an opportunity to open your mind to the power of myth, architecture, geometry, and symbolism encoded in this extraordinary capital. Now, the solution to these crises, I'm going to get my thesis right from the start, is epitomized in perhaps the 3 most significant buildings in the capital. The first is the Pyramid of Peace and Reconciliation. It is a modern multi-faith cathedral dedicated to the renunciation of violence and the promotion of faith and human equality. The second building is the Nazarbayev Center, a nonprofit humanitarian educational institution dedicated to nuclear non-proliferation. And finally, the central pavilion of the World Expo site, which is dedicated to the future of energy. and it was recently opened in 2017. What's so extraordinary about the World Expo that no one ever heard of is that it harnessed 5 elements in an entirely new way. First, it encompassed geothermal heat from the earth. It then harnessed the air through wind and kinetic energy, so airflow. Thirdly, it used water in an entirely unique way. Water through an innovative solution wherein rainwater becomes drinking water and used for electric power. And finally, or actually 2 other things, it harnessed the power of the sun through solar energy and ether, the space, earth, air, water, fire, and ether, the 5 elements in an entirely new, exotic way and formula for the sustainability of the planet. The World Expo no one ever heard of. Now, you might be wondering what on earth compelled me to do an exhaustive 4-year study of this extraordinary capital, and that it happened by sheer accident. I was preparing a graduate course in the spring of 2013 dedicated to what was a subject of deep fascination for me. It was the notion of building paradise on earth, or utopia. And I wanted to provide a chronology of world, times, and places where there was this effort to build paradise on earth. I framed this course for graduate students at the University of Manitoba and Department of Architecture from Atlantis to Astana. I thought that was a good way to frame it. Plato's Atlantis to Nazarbayev's Astana. So laying the groundwork for the course, you begin on the internet. And I started searching through popular topics of simply just type into Google after this lecture, Astana plus architecture, and you will find yourself plunged down a rabbit hole of popular misconceptions about Kazakhstan. That it is the sun-worshipping capital of Zionist Freemasons, that its buildings are energetically lined together, linked to the pyramid at Giza, and that the city's master plan is actually really a magical diagram devised by totalitarian world government, aka the Illuminati. So you could imagine my utter amazement. I mean, this is where, art mimics reality in such a profound way. You can imagine my utter amazement when I'm going down this rabbit hole of, and by the way, I've carved out a very niche career. That is, I've become a specialist in the architecture of secret societies. That makes me one of about 3 other people in the world that were my 2 supervisors at the University of Cambridge. So there were 3 people that had a penchant for looking at the architecture of Freemasonry. So you could imagine my total amazement when I'm looking at all of this stuff that I'd never heard of Astana. And at that very moment, I couldn't make this up, no joke, I get a phone call. Oh. And it was the protocol officer of Manitoba, where from time to time, as Patrick outlined, I will get invited to give tours to dignitaries, architectural tours to dignitaries that visit Manitoba. So the Prince of Wales, when he comes to Winnipeg, they say, hey, why don't you do that Hermetic Code tour of the Manitoba Ledge for the Prince of Wales? So my utter amazement is that the protocol officer of Manitoba asked me if I was free to give a tour to the ambassador of Kazakhstan and his wife, who had just come to Winnipeg, and he thought it would be interesting that they'd get a Masonic tour of the Manitoba Ledge. So I'm looking at my phone, and every tab on my computer screen reads, the Illuminati, architecture, Freemasonry, they are watching. Okay, bring, and there I go. So I said, okay, on one condition. Can I meet the ambassador for breakfast first? And so a deal was struck. And what happened was I met him for breakfast, and I did something that was rather brash. I extended my hand to him, and I said, sir, very nice to meet you. I know what you're doing. And he said, okay, this is my wife, Dr. Albo. What am I doing? I said, well, you're doing what every other great civilization has done since the dawn of time. Okay, what's that? I said, you're using monumental architecture to announce that you've arrived on the world stage. And that got his attention. He said, that's correct. That is what we're doing. I said, but you're missing something. Okay, what am I missing? I said, you need a foundation myth. A foundation myth. And he said, what's a foundation myth? I said, a foundation myth has been central to the rise of great capitals since the earliest settlement sites in Sumer and Mesopotamia. Foundation myth, a myth that galvanizes your architecture and your city. Because for everybody else, it looks like the Illuminati capital of the world. And he said, that is a great idea. Who's going to do that? And 4 years hence is this study. So what happened was at this impromptu meeting with the ambassador of Kazakhstan, as I'm looking at the architecture of Astana for the very first time, allowed me to do something that I've never done before, and that was take my entire body of scholarship in reverse. That was, rather than decode Masonic buildings, monuments, gardens, cemeteries, I would encode a fictitious Masonic capital with foundation myth. One that will be as compelling as every other theory that exists on the capital. And in fact, I would argue, perhaps even more so, because it involves each one of you. Now, let me just say that Astana is not the Illuminati capital of the world. And why? Well, because the real Illuminati instead emerged in 1776 from a student circle surrounding a charismatic professor of canon law, Adam Weishaupt. And at the University of Ingolstadt, he established a kind of 18th century equivalent to Berkeley flower power. The Illuminati incorporated esoteric rituals in an effort for political aspirations. Their esoteric rituals were borrowed almost in toto from Freemasonry. And what they did is that they wanted to do one thing, and that was replace the Roman Catholic hegemony ruling over Bavaria and replace it with an ideal liberal government. A liberal government that would go through exhaustive lessons in moral deprogramming. They wanted to remove education from the clerical authority. They wanted to raise people that would be reared on Enlightenment philosophy and rational inquiry. Not so nefarious after all. Now, the Illuminati, it was very short-lived. It dissolved in 1785. That means that it existed for 9 years. In fact, the only remaining original art of the Illuminati was one that I found in the Stadtmuseum in Ingolstadt when I went to see and investigate the original writings of the Illuminati about 10 years ago. And when I went to see the archivist, I said to him, I'm one of the countless thousands of people that have come here for one purpose. I would like to see the original writings of the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati. And he pulled down his glasses, looked at me strangely, and said, well, I've worked here for 30 years, and you are the second person to ever ask for them. And why? Because we don't go back to the sources. Go to the sources. And if you do, you find something far more compelling than what you find percolating on the internet. So it's just remarkable that this rudimentary ceiling mural, the only remaining piece of art of the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati, a short-lived, highly ineffectual secret society, has become such a countercultural obsession, especially among the giants of the hip-hop industry. But albeit for me to question that Jay-Z and Kanye West did not have a very fine reading in the writings of Rousseau, Helvetius, or Adam Smith, as the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati did. Their students were forced to read the works of the Enlightenment. I don't know. Leave it to me. I will just throw that out there. So what I did is that in order to write a foundation myth, you need to have 3 basic ingredients. You need to go to archaeology, you need to have some form of monumental art, and you finally need a compelling narrative. So it was just further shocking for me to find that there were 3 great discoveries, archaeological discoveries that happened in Kazakhstan in the last 5 years that most people haven't heard of. The first is that we discovered that there are late Bronze Age pyramids, step pyramids, found in Kazakhstan. How many people, raise your hands, knew that there were step pyramids recently found in Kazakhstan? 1 person. Okay. The other thing is that we found the world's largest pentagram carved on the side of a desolate lake in Kazakhstan, identified by Google Earth as the Devil Pentagram. Go on Google Earth, type in Devil Pentagram, and you will find this exact location on the Upper Tobol Reservoir called the Satan's Pentagram, the Devil Pentagram, a 1,200-foot clearly marked pentagram. And finally was the discovery of immense geoglyphs carved onto the Kazakh steppe. About 100 of these appear. They're like the Central Asian equivalent to the Nazca lines in Peru, except this collection were vast. I mean, some of them were 260 meters wide, like the square, or the very first emblem of perhaps the most notorious, infamous symbol in all world culture, a swastika. That is the earliest description that we have of a swastika. So pyramids, pentagram, swastika. Do I have your attention? Now, though widely associated with Nazi ideology, the swastika was, in fact, a benevolent symbol of Indo-European origin and is found in the ancient Sanskrit text for Vedic architectural theory as the ideal way of making and constructing a capital city. These are just ideas for you to think about. In order to create a foundation myth, I need to operate at the level of our imagination, these based on real archaeological sources and facts. Now, what is also largely unknown is that 5,500 years ago, ancient Central Asian nomads developed 3 key innovations that shaped the modern world. The first is that they were the first to domesticate the horse. Now, you might think of this today as being like, what's the big deal, domesticating the horse? Well, in 5,500 years ago, domesticating the horse meant that you could travel vast distances and learn from a variety of cultures. Now, we know that the earliest domesticated villages in the bow tie culture is where we have evidence of, in fact, an area very near modern Astana is where the horse was first domesticated. The other thing, and this doesn't take much great revelation, was the invention of the wheel and axle found in the areas surrounding Kazakhstan. Now, through trial and error in the Karaganda region, the wheel and axle was used as a farming implement and later had a completely different function. And then finally is the birthplace of Proto-Indo-European language. Now, I have a colleague of mine from that we did studies in ancient languages at the University of Toronto who might appreciate that Proto-Indo-European is the mother tongue, okay? This is just an illustration that gives you an idea of where our languages come from. So think of all the languages of Europe, including English, derive from a mother tongue. And from the branches of this tree, there is a way of constructing a way of looking at myths as well. Ma, wa, fa, mother, father, water. Those words are 15, 20,000 years old. And they derive from a trunk of a tree, very ancient, deriving from this area of the world. So, when you look at this glorious relief of Tiglath-Pileser, what you're seeing is the silent accomplishments of Central Asian nomads. The wheel, language, and the horse, instruments that were then used for war. So, the cradle of civilization has silent partners, and those are in Central Asia. And perhaps one of the oldest elements of Central Asia is the notion of the veneration of the sky. And so these ideas and these typologies find a place in Astana, particularly with the Khan Shatar Entertainment Center. This is the world's largest outdoor tent built in Astana by the British architect Norman Foster. Now, what it is it doubles as both a retail mall and an ideological space for imagining Kazakh identity. At the very center of it are 3 large masts that meet around a central ring. And this ring is known in Kazakh heritage as a shanirak. And this is the dome, or the central sphere, the gate of the sky, which was used as a device that was passed down from father to son and father to son, going back thousands of years. The very notion of the yurt is ancient, but used in a modern context. Now, these ideas derive from a much older notion, which is, of course, our veneration of mountains. Kanshatar, which derives its name from the highest mountain range in Kazakhstan, the Khan Tengri mountain range, is this pyramidal peak is meant to venerate the sky god Tengri. Tengri, one of the oldest words of identifying the sky and the supreme celestial deity of the sky, Dingir, Tengri. This idea of venerating the sky is why you have so much blue in Kazakhstan. You see all of their buildings are purposely made to be blue as an imagery of the sky over and over again, so much so that the government put stipulations that the building facades must reflect the national colors of the sky and gold representing the sun. And you see it over and over again. So it's just remarkable to think that this capital should come from such humble origins. This is the first building built in Astana, and it is this stunning capital finds its inspiration from a rather uninspiring military garrison built by Kazakhs in 1830. By 1961, this is what modern-day Astana looked like, Selenograd. And Selenograd became eventually Astana. And so when you're looking at Astana, which became a capital in 1997, is that the period from 1997 to 2017, a period of 20 years, you find this remarkable emergence. It's kind of like the story of the little train that could, where they got the wealth to do so. Everyone wants to know how did they get a budget of $5 billion per year on state architecture projects? Where does the money come from? Well, Kazakhstan is very lucky in that it is endowed with 5 natural resources: oil, gas, gold, diamonds, uranium. That's called a full house of natural resources. So, this is the figure that who is really Astana. You see, you can't have a capital without a hero behind it. And this is, I will let you know, the Tom Brady of contemporary autocrats. I mean, love him or hate him, this guy wins Super Bowls. He was born in the most humble dwellings in a yurt in southern Kazakhstan, rose up to the highest levels of the Soviet Politburo, eventually took over the governorship of Kazakhstan, and decided to do something totally bizarre and strange when they had a beleaguered healthcare system. They had nothing but failure. Yet, he said, we need to build a capital. Now, what's very strange about this man is that he has 0 training in architecture, yet he penned a remarkable work of architectural theory called The Heart of Eurasia, where he explored the philosophy of symbolism, architecture, and the power of architecture to galvanize the dreams of a nation. So this guy, Nursultan Nazarbayev, the president of Kazakhstan, found and actually took his inspiration from the most unlikely source. America's most successful urban planner, most successful entrepreneur, proto-Freemason and anti-Semite, Walt Disney. Now you might think that's totally ridiculous. What does Nursultan Nazarbayev have to do with Walt Disney? Well, both men sought to construct an entirely new civic identity steeped in the architecture of hyper-reality. Yes, that is a giant UFO. So the circus in Astana is a UFO. And so what both men did is that they knew that hyper-reality, myth, and the imagination was a way of constructing a whole new civic identity. They share the same dream. Yet, more than just simply a pioneer of the animation industry, Walt Disney was dedicated the last 30 years of his life to deriving solutions to the problems of a modern city. And for him, the total problem of contemporary society could be rooted in cities. And that spurred him to develop the most ambitious project in Walt Disney's life, which was in 1966, called the Epcot Center, the Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow, where he had a radial plan with a glass dome, which carries a stark reminder of the radial plan and glass dome of Astana. And if you look at this crystalline super temple, the Baiteric Tower, it's meant to symbolize the shared hopes and dreams of the regenerated Kazakh society. And in the very same way that Walt Disney envisioned Earth as spaceship planet Earth, a geodesic sphere that serves as perhaps the most iconic feature of Walt Disney's World Resort at Epcot. And it parallels, in many respects, Astana's World Expo Pavilion, although it is dubbed by Kazakhs as the Dark Star. So, in its original form, Epcot Center was designed as a model utopian community for 20,000 residents, interlocked by state-of-the-art monorail system and flanked by a green belt. Astana and Epcot both share a magical kingdom centered upon a nationalistic fairy tales and utopian aspirations of a master planned community. So, the first question that I set out in my little reminder asking you guys to come here is, what on earth does Astana have to do with Walt Disney? Now you know. Now, the most noticeable thing about Astana is the profound role geometry plays in its design. This is not Las Vegas. This is not Egypt. This is Astana. Triangles, circles, squares, and even a vesica piscis form the major monuments of the capital. A vesica piscis? What the heck is a vesica piscis? Well, there it is there. That is a central concert hall for Kazakhstan in the shape of two circles interlocked at their center, forming, this is the plan of the concert hall, forming the very first postulate of Euclid's elements. How do you form an equilateral triangle? From two interlocking circles at their midpoint. And what was so extraordinary about the vesica piscis is that, and this ended up being a chapter in my dissertation, is that it was, for medieval Freemasons, the most advanced system of architectural knowledge. It was known as the secret of the Freemasons. Everybody that's wondering what the secrets of the Freemasons are, it's architecture. It's an architectural community. They swear oaths not to reveal the sign, points, parts, symbols, strokes of the hidden mysteries of Freemasonry rooted in geometry. And this system of geometry, seemingly facile, is actually quite advanced. Because if you take a system of interlocking circles, you could determine the length, plans, and elevations of Gothic cathedrals. That is mind-blowing. You have to imagine that with the most rudimentary hand tools, a square, a compass, and a plumb line, these great master builders built the great cathedrals of Europe using one simple symbol, which you find over and over again in medieval church arcading, illuminated manuscripts, stained glass theophanies, and in the mind of Renaissance architects. It's the reification of geometry that led to the design of ideal cities. The whole notion of actually building an ideal capital city derives from the Renaissance, and the Italian architects of the 15th century wanted to create a perfectly planned city that would achieve noble ends, and the citizenry would be lifted out of darkness, vice, and chaos simply by having a geometrically ordered system of public squares, streets, perfectly clean buildings, arcades, porticos that all conform to harmony-producing laws, proportions, and sacred numbers. In Astana, these ideas reach a completely megalomaniacal utopian scale in the size of an unfinished project called Astana City Vision, an ambitious project of an indoor city capable of housing 30,000 residents using the most advanced models of intelligent urban design beneath a perfectly climatized dome and spanning nearly 2 million square meters. So people that think that Washington, D.C.'s got something on the Freemasons. Trust me, nothing is more extraordinary than this capital from a geometrical, mythical, and pseudo-Masonic perspective. The master plan of the capital is right here. And it was crafted by a Japanese architect named Kisho Kurokawa, who introduced 3 fundamental concepts to his design. And this will allow you to understand the subplot of my book and allow you to actually figure out that there is a secret riddle in this book that will garner you a $30,000 prize. I've compiled this presentation in such a way that, unbeknownst to you, I am giving you suggestive clues of how to figure out my puzzle. So if I say pay attention, then pay attention. Now, the first plan of Kisho Kurokawa, his first 3 basic concepts, the first one was metabolism, the notion that you must use architecture to be inspired by the flexibility of biological organisms. The very first plan that Kisho Kurokawa had for a city was modeled after the double helix of DNA. And he incorporated those ideas of natural growth in the design and master plan of Astana, scenically merging old Russian and new Kazakh sectors into a single unity. The second was something that he called symbiosis, the notion of living together, that we should be, that this was the very bedrock of nomadic heritage, is that they were adaptable, they were pluralistic, and they were completely open to exchange. Why Kazakhstan is unique is that it is not east and it's not west. It has borrowed the religious ideas and philosophies of the world. It is both Nestorian Christians and Zoroastrians. They are secular Muslims, and they're also incorporate Confucius ideology. So this very notion of adaptability was central to being nomadic, and they brought those ideas into an urban plan. So when you're looking at these buildings, behind their gilded facade is a deeper architectural message related to metabolism, symbiosis, and the third thing was called symbolism, that discernible geometrical figures would be expressed in the traditional symbols of Kazakhstan, and those traditional symbols would reflect the traditions of the world. So what you find is that all of this potpourri of architectural styles is identified in what I've identified in my book as a unique style of architecture. That is, it is not postmodern, it's not Central Asian, it's not Islamic, it's not Russian Baroque, it is Eurasian. Eurasian, and a completely new yet identifiable style of architecture that blends from all of these different traditions, but in a complete architectural setting. The only parallel that I could think of an effort to incorporate all of the styles of architecture in one setting comes from the most important book in the study of English Freemasonry, which is Anderson's Constitutions. Now, I know everybody is completely hooked on Albert Pike, but forget Albert Pike. Albert Pike wrote a rambling book of nonsense. If you've ever read Morals and Dogma, it's total garbage. It is a product of its time. If you really want to understand the deeper mysteries of Freemasonry, you should look to Anderson's 1723 Constitutions, which he describes the science of geometry and the progress of all architectural styles as emerging from one proposition, Euclid's Elements, and in particular, Proposition 47. So in Freemasonry, geometry was seen as a source of all knowledge, the kernel of all advancement truth, and the ultimate mysteries of wisdom itself. And it was inscribed in geometry, which was seen as a kind of touchstone of power that held within our hands the ability to recreate the divine in form. That geometry is unique among all the 7 liberal arts because it was a way of verifiably taking the blueprint of the mind of God and building it. And this is why the very symbolism of Freemasonry and almost all secret societies glean in some respect an order of geometry. But this is a subject on myth. And Kazakhstan has been long perceived in the West as a land belonging more to myth than to reality. The Greek historian Herodotus believed that the area of modern-day Kazakhstan was protected by Amazon warriors featured here. The Amazon warriors come from Kazakhstan. And beyond the high peaks of the Tian mountain range was the mythical land, according to the Greeks, of Hyperborea, a land of perpetual youth, nonviolence, perfection, and harmony. And even stranger is the myth, perhaps the most essential myth of British identity, is the story of King Arthur and the Round Table. And the origins of this story derive from Kazakhstan. I did not misspeak. The Sword and the Stone, the quest for the Holy Grail, all descend from folk tales that were told by Eurasian horsemen nearly 1,000 years before the stories of Arthur were ever written down in the 12th century. Today, these great myths of Arthur, Hyperborea, and the Amazons have all been completely undermined by another, altogether modern satirical myth, and that is the myth of Borat. Where is Borat from? From Kazakhstan. So you could see that this is a place that has been ripe for mythologizing. Not just now, but for thousands of years. Now I should say, and this is very important, that myths are not merely the fables of the gods. They are embedded in nearly every aspect of the human imagination. In art, literature, psychology, philosophy, film, and of course, even architecture records some fabric of myth. Can anybody identify this figure and where it is located? Rockefeller Center, yes, but who is that? Prometheus, stealing the fire of the gods. So there you are, skating along the Rockefeller Plaza, not realizing that the gods are there, peering down upon you. Myth and architecture go hand in hand. And myths, as I describe here, are not and should not be synonymous with fiction. They reflect our most primordial desires, and they conceal a higher wisdom. And they run through the whole course of human history right up to our very own day. Foundation myths in particular have been at the heart of world civilization for 5,000 years. A foundation myth has always marked the order or the new order of things, whether it is the Exodus out of Egypt, of which there is no archaeological evidence, the founding of Rome, or the manifest destiny of America, that the American settlers were given by divine providence the ability to conquer all lands to the west. This is a foundation myth. Now, you might think that we have no such things of foundation myths today, but I should tell you that there is a completely new system of finance, of value and exchange, invented by the creator of Bitcoin, of whom no one knows who he is. So Satoshi Nakamoto is another form of a foundation myth. And if you think of Satoshi as a foundation myth, that is the first, an architect of cryptography, you should look no further than the progenitor of architectural cryptography, Hiram Abiff. Hiram Abiff, the hero of Freemasonry, the Tyrian bronze worker who was the chief architect of King Solomon's temple, murdered by 3 ruffians attempting to extort his secret knowledge. And here he is in between the 2 pillars of strength and establishment. And this pervasive memory of King Hiram Abiff, a constituent element of all Masonic rituals, is the notion of a myth woven into rituals, into their catechisms, into the architecture, ultimately deriving from the Temple of Solomon, as well as an allegorical path to virtue interwoven with moral philosophy. But that's not where I garnered my inspiration for this book. The inspiration that I found for writing this book came from an altogether different secret society and an altogether different ideological founder of a new world order, which can be traced to this particular order. Does anybody know? The precursor of Freemasonry, the central, not the Knights Templar, correct, the Rosicrucians, and their legendary founder, Christian Rosenkreutz, the founder of the Rosicrucian Brotherhood, featuring here emerging from his tomb. The emblematic image of the Rosicrucians was, of course, an invisible college of adepts in possession of a universal science that united religion, medicine, philosophy, and mathematics with spiritual alchemy for the regeneration of humankind. And this was a very extraordinary period when the Rosicrucians emerged on the scene in 1614. And what they did is that it was during a time of great struggle in Europe. This was at the eve of the 30 Years' War. And the 30 Years' War marked this great antagonism between the Roman Catholic Church and the Protestant Reformation. And emerging out of this great chaos was the idea that a secret brotherhood was in existence, that they were working in secret, and that they were uniting philosophy, art, and science. Philosophy, religion, the very bedrock of civilization in a completely new way, and they produced a series of apocryphal manifestos. The Fama Fraternitatis of 1614, the Confessio Fraternitatis, and the most important of the manifestos of the Rosicrucians, which is the Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, which we know was written by one person, this man. And having fathered the Rosicrucian Brotherhood, Johann Valentin Andreae set out to do something entirely unique. He knew that if he was going to change the face of Europe, a place of chaos, of 30 Years' War, he needed to devise a myth to imagine, to create in the minds of the enlightened people like Robert Fludd and countless other people like Comenius, the intellectual forebearers of modern society, were moved by the idea that there was a secret brotherhood called the Rosicrucians. But I will tell you something, they did not exist. How many people here think that the Rosicrucians exist? It is a complete hoax. It was a hoax written by the Tübingen Circle, led by Johann Valentin Andreae, because they thought, how the heck are we going to get ourselves out of this storm? And so they invented the notion of a myth and a legendary figure who was going to change the world, and change the world in a totally unique way with a completely new science. Christian Rosenkreuz is the Satoshi Nakamoto of the early 17th century. A completely new way of seeing the world. But he went a step further. He wanted to devise an ideal city, an ideal society. You needed an ideal city. So he came up with the plan for an ideal city in 1619, and this became the blueprint of a whole new way of uniting the world against religious crisis. And so what he did is that they did something which is very powerful to change the world. He cloaked his utopia in a myth, and then wrapped that myth in a great mystery. And by doing this, he effectively sparked the most effective publicity stunt of all time. A full-scale Rosicrucian obsession that swept across the 17th century and remains, even to this day, an enduring subject of fascination and intrigue. There was no Rosicrucian Brotherhood. It is a complete myth. But the myth had great legs, and it worked. It got people thinking. It created, in fact, it led to the precursor of the Royal Society. The Royal Society. And it also inspired Francis Bacon's New Atlantis. And it further inspired the Salon de la Rose Croix, perhaps the most important artistic circle of the 19th century in France, that were moved by the mythic themes of the Rosicrucian Brotherhood, believing that they existed and believing that arcane symbols could be envisioned as a gateway to higher reality and spiritual gnosis. And so in the whole subject of art, to me, I am most moved by the symbolists, who themselves were moved by the Royal Society, by Francis Bacon, by Johann Valentin Andreae, who invented the myth of the Rosicrucian Brotherhood. Now, the myth of all myths is very easy. The myth of all myths, the mother myth, as it were, is the tree of life in the Garden of Eden. which, curiously enough, serves as the bedrock for understanding the myth of Astana. Right here is the Baiteric Tower. Literally means the tree of life. And at the summit of this tree of life, or the reason that this tree of life was built, was to embody an ancient myth in Kazakh folklore, that at the summit of a mountain, there was a tree of life, perhaps familiar to you if you know your Norse mythology, and that every year a mythical eagle would lay an egg, a golden egg representing the sun at the top crown of a poplar tree, which was then devoured by a malevolent serpent. A tree in a garden devoured by a serpent. Where have I heard that before? Oh, geez, okay. It is an ancient story, not derived from the writers of Genesis, but much, much older. So, one day, a child, hero, intercedes, kills the snake, saves the eagle, and a new day is born. So when you look at the Baiteric Tower, the white base represents the tree, the golden orb represents the egg or the sun, and the steel lattice work represents the branches that reach up to the sky. And these ideas are brought to life mythically into the architecture of Astana. Now, astonishingly, the Baiteric itself has an ancient literary parent, the Sumerian tale of Etana from about 2100 BCE. Perhaps the oldest myth of world history. Etana, sounds a lot like Astana. Etana begins with the construction of a great city, a monumental tower, and the quest of a hero with the help of an eagle. The opening lines of Etana begin, they built the city. The gods laid its foundations. They built a city. Let Etana be the architect. They built a tower, a shrine, and in the shade of that shrine, a poplar was growing, and in its crown, an eagle settled. That story has nearly 300 variations the world over, from Ireland to the Arctic Circle. A story of a youthful hero ascending on the back of an eagle persists in the Hindu myth of Garuda, the mount of the Lord God Vishnu, the Greek myth of the boy Ganymede, who I found on the way here. I took a cab with Mr. Geography. Have you ever taken a cab with Mr. Geography, anyone? Oh, yeah. So anyways, we took a cab with Mr. Geography. You could ask this guy anything from the square miles of how many islands there are in the Philippines to the square mile of Italy, and he gets it like that. Any question. And anyways, he's well known. And somehow, before we exited the car, the question that he asked us was, he goes, oh, I have a question for you, and if you get this question right, you don't have to pay the fare. And what he said was, what is the largest of the moons, of all the moons in the solar system? Does anybody know? Ganymede, the Greek boy. I mean, like, this is just strange that he should mention this as we're getting into the car, but the Greek myth, the boy Ganymede, abducted by Zeus, who serves as a cupbearer in Mount Olympus, is an age-old tale. And another age-old tale you're probably familiar with. Who? Bilbo Baggins. Yes, in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, who is lifted on the back of an eagle. So it's only fitting that my second source of inspiration is not just the Rosicrucians, but the literary circle that met here, the Eagle and Child pub in Oxford, where J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis formed the Oxford Inklings, the most celebrated literary circle of the 20th century. The works of the Inklings employed myth as a solution against what they identified, the Inklings identified, as the three greatest traumas of their time. They looked at the 20th century and they saw nothing but war and bloodshed, and they said, how are we going to combat this? And what they did was they appealed to myth. And the myths, before they appealed to myth, they needed to identify the core problems. And for the Inklings, who met at the Eagle and Child pub, they said disenchantment, materialism, and alienation were the traumas of the 20th century. And for Tolkien, he thought that myth existed to serve virtue and to provide us with a fleeting glimpse at the essential truths of the human condition. something that he later inspired C.S. Lewis, a one-time atheist, come ardent Christian apologist, to conjecture that myth was the highest organ of truth, and the imagination was the organ of meaning. So C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia was recently discovered to have been a coded manuscript. Did you know that? That the 7 books of Narnia were a coded exegesis on the 7 planets of medieval cosmology? Well, this was written by a colleague of mine from the University of Cambridge. We were at Peterhouse together, and his name was Michael Ward. And there I was struggling writing a dissertation that I never thought anyone would find interesting on the Gothic Revival and the secrets of British Freemasonry. And he was having such a great time because he had discovered that the 7 books of Narnia were actually a coded lesson, that they were commentaries on the 7 planets of medieval cosmology. Because for Lewis, he believed that what we lost in the contemporary world was our connection to the cosmos, and that each one of the planets of the cosmos had virtues that we could glean from. And so the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is all about Jupiter. If you know how to read it, it's about Jupiter. Prince Caspian is all about the moon. And so behind the tales of the stories of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien is a deeper allegorical message. When you read Lord of the Rings, unknowingly, you're being inculcated with Roman Catholic theology. The quest of the ring, good and evil. These ideas were meant as a way to wake up young children who would read these books and somehow subliminally be ruled by a higher message. And this allowed me, provided for me the foundation, the Rosicrucian myth and the Oxford Inklings, allowed me to recontextualize Astana as the most extraordinary manifestation of an age-old mother myth, the ascent of an eagle and the rise of a hero. The hero is the city. So the symbolism of the eagle is omnipresent throughout the capital. If you go to Astana, which I hope you get a chance to do because there is a riddle in this book that allows you to go to Astana, that if you go to Astana, you will see that it is impregnated with eagles. The eagle crowns the centerpiece of the presidential park, the Monument of Independence, the Palace of the President. It lines up every significant building along the mall. Eagle, 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 eagle. All elite eagle, all lined according to the axis of the eastern direction of the sun. So, it's notwithstanding that the insignia of the right of perfection in Freemasonry, the 33rd degree of Scottish Rite, should also figure an eagle. And why? Not for any other reason than that for thousands of years, the eagle has served as an ideological link between myth-making and identity formation. Ask yourself, why nearly all the civilizations of the world and the royal heads of Europe has an insignia of an eagle? Germany, Mexico, Rome, the United States. So, Kazakhstan became a foil for me to understanding how to create a foundation myth. And what's very important about the 20th century is that it marked a period of unprecedented hardship and tyranny for the people of Kazakhstan. Perhaps no other place in the world suffered more greatly than Kazakhstan, in that in the remote regions of the north, it was a vast array of ghastly labor camps called the gulags. The gulags largely featured in Kazakhstan. The most wretched of the gulags was this place right here, located on the near site of modern-day Astana. It was called the Betrayers of the Motherland. These were for the wives of the betrayers of the motherland, and the conditions they lived under were just gruesome, but not nearly as bad as Khrushchev's forced collectivization project, which resulted in the death of about 14.5 million people in Kazakhstan, including 6 million Kazakhs. 40% of their population perished from one of the worst environmental disasters, the drying up of the Aral Sea. And the drying up of the Aral Sea today, which was a teeming bed of fish and life, is now a ship cemetery. So here is a country that in the 20th century, during the time that the Inklings said that there was great trauma, had suffered from the gulags, one of the planet's worst and most atrocious environmental catastrophes. And during the Cold War era, it was the site of nearly 500 secret nuclear tests that were, you probably heard of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but you probably never heard of Semipalatinsk, have you? How many people have heard of Semipalatinsk? Okay, the polygon. This was the area in eastern Kazakhstan where detonations on the ground and in the air contaminated vast areas of land, causing the radiation-infected illnesses of 1.5 million people. There are areas of Semi today where children are born, 1 in 20 children are born with such deformities that they make the elephant man look like a GQ model. So, the payload unleashed at Semipalatinsk was equivalent to over 2,500 times the payload of Hiroshima. So in 1991, the Kazakh government, at the same year that they gained their independence, they did something that nobody expected. We all wanted to know what they were going to do with the 4th largest arsenal of nuclear material, and they disarmed it. They disarmed, voluntarily disarming nuclear material. So, the gulags, environmental catastrophe, and nuclear proliferation. This is a country that for 100 years has experienced that plight, and those, I will argue, is the plight we face today in the 21st century. So if there was ever a country or a city that firsthand understands the traumas of the Oxford Inklings and were horrified by it, it was Kazakhstan. In every respect, Astana can be seen as a type of phoenix risen from the ashes of the 20th century to become an exemplar of peace, tolerance, and sustainability. But there was one last myth that I needed to contend with, and that was that the 3 principal buildings that I associated with Kazakhstan's global destiny are the same ones that have been widely associated with the signs and symbolism of the Illuminati. The Pyramid of Peace is no doubt a pyramid of power. The World Expo Pavilion is perhaps the most perfect realization of the Masonic architect Etienne Louis Boulet's promise that architecture and geometry could lead to the social harmony of the world, and that geometrical solids and symbols could lead man towards a higher harmony. And in particular, the very building that was meant to signal the end of nuclear proliferation looks nothing more than an all-seeing eye peering out into space. When you stand in the center of this building and you look out, this is what you see. I couldn't think of a more appropriate all-seeing eye than that one. And of course, the House of Ministries, the comprehensive state administration project, which these 2 gleaming towers evoke the most profound Masonic message par excellence. The twin towers that stood at the forecourt of King Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem, the pillars of Yakin establishment and Boaz strength, become the most recurring motifs in the canon of Western architecture. Don't believe me? Look again and you will see 2 columns in Antis for a bank, for a synagogue, for a cathedral, for the columns of the Baldacchino in Rome, or Frank Lloyd Wright's milestone of modern architecture, the Larkin Administration Building. Ideas that come from the mysteries of Masonic Lodge built into form in the most decidedly unique setting, Astana. So what I did was I took a complete gamble. Rather than decoding the city, I decided to reframe my study into a modern-day foundation myth. Just as the Inklings devised epic fantasy to ameliorate the great traumas of the 20th century, Astana was to become an architectural hero in the fight against the 3 greatest threats of the 21st century. Religious intolerance, is anybody going to argue with that? Planetary sustainability, that's still controversial. and the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Now, when I first set out this thesis many years ago, one of my colleagues read what I was doing, and he said, planetary sustainability, okay. Religious extremism, no problem. But the proliferation of nuclear weapons, I think you're off there. Just saying. So, what I decided to do was, in order to properly engage my audience, that is you, I decided to code my book with a secret message. And I did it for one reason. In order to create what the Rosicrucians did, is that they wrapped their mystery in a myth, and they enticed learned people to read closely their apocryphal manifestos. And the result is still 400 years later, we are talking about a secret society that did not exist. So what I decided to do was offer a book, the first book of its kind as far as I know, one that combines rigorous history and scholarship with a profoundly sophisticated treasure hunt. And this treasure hunt is for one purpose. I wanted to do something that's never been written before, like Astana, but I wanted to do something even more profound, which was I need you to read closely the signs and symbols in this book. And not because I'm trying to sell a prize to go to Astana, because I believe that if you employ your imagination and you use the vocabulary of myth and symbolism and architecture, the results are an experiment that are still underway. This is not about a book. This is not about the Illuminati capital of the world. It is an effort to engage my audience to read closely by dangling a carrot. And the carrot is that if you decipher the message, the Illuminati message in this book, you will get 2 first-class tickets to Astana. You get to stay there 7 days in a 5-star hotel, and you'll have $5,000 to spend, all by simply reading closely the signs and symbols of the Illuminati capital of the world. So before we go, I'm going to leave you with one last clue. Thank you all very much for your time. Okay, we have some Q&A. Go ahead. Sure.
Frank, I'm really curious. Why is the hand there? What is its purpose? I gotta know.
You mean in the Baitira Tower?
Yeah. Is it for swearing in ceremonies? Does it have anything? What is it? It's not just a tourist attraction. It must have a purpose.
Okay. What's your name again? Laurel. What Laurel is talking about is at the apex of the Baitiric Tower, the golden sun of the egg where the tree of life is. There is a golden triangle with the handprint of the president. And once you stick your hand, I mean, it's like Total Recall on steroids, okay? And when you stick your hand inside of the triangle, it cues the national anthem. Now, there have been many theories speculating what the purpose of the hand is, so I'm glad you raised it. As I see it, it's a way of becoming a participant in the drama of Astana. And it's something that Masonic architects of the 18th century did with gardens. What they did is that gardens were designed in such a way, in the French Enlightenment, these Masonic picturesque gardens, in such a way that they compelled you to interactively, in a theatrical way, play with the architecture. So, for instance, there's one Masonic garden called Les Desarts outside of Paris, where you descend into this grotto, and you go down into this grotto, and you could see off in the distance a beacon of light that leads towards the area where the garden continues. And you go into this garden setting, into the womb of Mother Earth, and as you release yourself out to the sky, you see a temple of contemplation. And that temple is there beckoning you to walk closer to it. And once you get there, you're meant to sit there and read a hidden inscription. And then you move on in this journey through the garden in such a way that it was meant to interactively have you leave feeling more intelligent, better balanced, and altogether more civilized. Similarly, and I know that there are architects here, is that architects today build simply for utility, and they've lost the plot. Architecture should be used to inspire and to create a new form of civic identity, a way of interactively working with it, and as far as I could tell, Disneyland comes a close second, but Astana is an interactive journey. That is part of it, putting your hand there. So it's a little more clever than just hearing the national anthem. I think it's an interactive journey. Go ahead.
Is it?
Sorry, you make a comparison between Disney and Astana, what they created. But Disney, everyone knows what Disney is, but the marketing of Astana is almost not there. So why is that, is what I'm curious about.
Well, we don't know now, but we will. I mean, does anybody know where the Syrian peace talks were conducted? The first time that they were conducted outside of Geneva. Astana. Astana is the new Geneva. And it is meant to be this billboard that is supposed to be open to the cultures of the world, the religions of the world, a peaceful, sustainable place. And it's kind of been a billboard for foreign investment. But so was Tom Brady, picked in the 6th round, the 199th pick. But everyone's heard of Tom Brady today. He was the last pick in the 6th round. And yet he went on to win 6 Super Bowls. I will argue that Astana is a Super Bowl in disguise. You'll be hearing more and more about it. You just don't know it yet. Does that help?
Doing some research.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, okay, so I'm just listening to it. I'm thinking, well, does it have to do with meridian lines?
No. Personally, I do not espouse those ideas. I think that it's largely specious and based on the 19th century work of Alfred Watkins. And no, I don't think that there's any notion of meridian lines connecting Astana, although curiously enough, somebody sent, what's the guy's name? The hidden in plain sight guy. Who, you know the hidden in plain sight guy? Scott Almstadt, yes. Pointed out to me that there were very close numerological parallels between the Manitoba Legislative Building, a building I'd become obsessed with for 10 years, and Astana, in that they are divided by exactly 888 kilometers. And many other things. I don't know anything about that, nor do I venture into it. I try to look at architecture in a historical way. Go ahead.
Sorry, my name's Peter, and I just, great talk, by the way. And I was doing some research, and in Kazakhstan, they're inviting all this foreign investment. But in a city like Astana, I can't buy a house or whatever. It's one of the few world-class cities in the world where they don't want foreigners buying real estate.
That is not true. That's recently changing. The issue of foreign ownership is something that plagues most of Central Asia, but Kazakhstan is very recently actually probably going to change the name. It's not going to be a stand country. They don't accept visas anymore from Canada, so you can travel to Kazakhstan without a visa. That's new. So the World Expo signaled a new change for both ownership and the economy. Also, I should mention that after the World Expo site, it's not just going to sit there like most expo sites sitting there vacant like the Montreal or Vancouver. Instead, the entire area is going to be a new center for cryptocurrency finance. Kazakhstan will probably lead the world, at least Central Asia for the time being, in cryptocurrency finance.
Frank here. I just wanted to know, when you were in Astana, were you able to meet, I'll say, the autocrat, man or myth? Were you able to personally do it?
No, I have not met the Grand Poobah, but my very first visit, I went to the Office of the Master Plan. Not many cities have an Office of the Master Plan, where the Master Plan of Astana is designed to be exactly 3 million people. Astana cannot grow larger than 3 million people because they've done a very exhaustive examination of the cities of the world, including the Curb Heights in Toronto, to determine what were the best environments for creating an intelligent city. So when I went to the Master Plan office and I told them what I was doing, they laughed because there's no Masonic lodge or temple or notion of the Illuminati there. But when I mentioned that poetry and architecture was a way I was going to tell this story, it was quite marvelous. So I had a chance to sit there, look at the Master Plan, where I found that the entire area of Astana is perimetered by about 30 million hectares of planted trees. So it is meant to be what the Epcot Center was for 20,000 people, but for 3 million people. And once it reaches that number, that's it. And why? Because if you get a city that's been designed from scratch as a tabula rasa with a master plan, and it grows more than 3 million people, you get urban sprawl, you get squalor, you get traffic like you have in Toronto. So why should we adopt these principles? Why not create a master plan? So the city is the hero, not the architects. And in many respects, the architects themselves didn't even know the heritage from which they've derived, for instance, the monumental axis. I said, oh, this looks straight out of the 1901 Macmillan plan for Washington, D.C. And they were like, what? I was like, oh, okay, forget it.
I'm really intrigued about the symbolism of the eagle. You mentioned America, you mentioned Mexico.
Yes.
But then when you look at world civilizations, you look at the ancient Greeks, they didn't have the eagle. You look at the Egyptians, they didn't have the eagle.
Oh, really? Well, they had a falcon. I just mean a mythic bird. Yeah? It's a synonym for the ascent. Just like the dove is a synonym for the ascent, right?
Why does the British Empire have the lion and the unicorn?
Well, that's an altogether different subject. Go ahead.
A lot of the images seem like they were artistic renderings. Or how many of those buildings were really real?
The only one that isn't is the domed Capitol.
Oh, right.
Yeah, but no, all the others
working
are
on
executed. Yeah, they've spent about $7 billion in putting it, but it's on hold. It's done by the same architect that's doing the world headquarters for the Apple headquarters. Yeah, so oil prices drop, buildings don't get built. Yeah.
Is this an AI city? Is it developed, or is the city thinking for itself in a way?
Yeah, it's increasingly becoming a smart city. The World Expo Pavilion is divided into 7 layers. And as you go up to each level, you're introduced to a new form of energy that could change the world. And when you get to the very top, you're at the area of the ether of space and AI technology. Yes, they're very keen about being smart, not being nomads. They want to adopt, as part of their heritage, adopt from the different cultures of the world. I was going to show you a wonderful piece of jewelry. It's a It's a hair comb. It's about this large. And the level of details in this jewelry represent Greek craftsmanship. It represents Far Eastern craftsmanship. It represents all these different, if you know how to like decipher the different symbols in it, it has all these different cultures. So that's just been part of their heritage, is that they've been constantly gleaning from many different cultures. That nomadic heritage has been an essential part of their makeup and identity. And that includes learning from AI and, yeah, cryptocurrency too.
To follow you up on the idea of nomadic, what about the whole infrastructure of transportation itself? I mean, is this monorail, high speed? I mean, I didn't see anything like that.
Yeah, they're building their monorail system now. And yeah, the traffic lines are, I mean, it's hugely wide. They're about 15 lanes of traffic in the major centers. So you could go right from the airport in a direct line to the center of the city. It's very intelligently designed, very intelligently designed.
But based on, I mean, Kazakhstan, oil, but they don't want oil in the long run, do they?
No. They want to wean off the oil, and because they have a lot of other natural resources too. Yeah. Go ahead.
You know, when I looked at the aerial photographs of the layout, you know, which is stunning, right?
Yes.
You can't miss it.
No, it's totally.
And you know, I'm reminded of obviously like Washington Streets, that very intentional layout.
Yes.
But now I didn't hear you say anything about any kind of like was there some sort of concept of like a sacred geometry going on? Because what I noticed is there's all these circles lined up. They're very much like a Kabbalah tree of life or something. And then like the first one was like, it would even relate, there'd be a pool of water, and then it would be blue, then another one would be green, and it seemed to be like the colors and everything was really lining up to be some sort of grand tree of life, Kabbalah kind of.
Do you know what you're doing right now? You're doing exactly what I want you to do. Read closely. Use your imagination to peer beyond the veil of my introduction to the mysticism secrets of Astana. Read it closely. I'm glad that you're suggesting that. I haven't looked at it at that way, but I should mention, and I did make a good point of that, is that geometry is an essential element to understanding Astana. It's probably the perfect modern example of the sign that was above Plato's Academy. Let no man enter lest he know geometry. And so much so is this part of the school training for children in Astana, that they learn geometry, not in the classroom, but through buildings. They learn about trapezoids by looking at the Timur-Zoli building. They learn about isosceles triangles from understanding the golden ratio internal mechanics of the pyramid, the sphere. They learn about pi. So the children literally go into the street and read the buildings as a way of understanding geometry. Plato would have, like, be very happy. Go ahead.
Yeah, oh, sorry. I got kind of three questions. One of them is about the nuclear tests and how close it was to this place and who performed those. I'm assuming Russians probably.
Yeah.
But the second one is the satanic circle there. I'd like you to go into that a little bit more. And then, who is this guy running the country? Where was he educated? What's his background? Is he CIA like the rest of them? I mean, I think it's fairly obvious with the money coming in. And
okay, well, let me see if I could tackle each one of them. Okay, so the first question was
satanic circle or nuclear?
Okay,
test?
the nuclear. No, the nuclear testing was not near Astana, but it was a place of like gross contamination. And just so that we're all aware, is that you know what the shelf life of nuclear radiation is? Yeah, like thousands, and it's completely odorless. So the children that are born today from grandparents that were around the site of northeastern Kazakhstan are suffering from those illnesses, right? It goes into the ecosystem, the biology and whatnot. And this is one of the principal reasons why Kazakhstan is the leader in nuclear disarmament, because they've seen firsthand what it's like when you press a button. And so in that respect, they've learned it from their own hardship. and it was conducted by the Soviets from 1954 until the closing of the site. So I think the last testing done in Kazakhstan was 1985 or 84. So yeah, so for a period of about 45 years was, or 40 years was, yeah, massive. Yep, both in the, yep, both above ground and in the ground. Yeah, yeah, maybe even more than 500. The current, I've read everywhere from 456 or 450 to 612. So those were around those numbers. I mean, like one is enough, all right? Okay, the second question was the pentagram. Now, the pentagram was the site of a former Soviet military camp. Now, we see in the West that the pentagram has this nefarious association, but not so in Soviet culture, right? I mean, the Soviet Red Star. I mean, think of the military complex in Moscow is in the shape of a giant pentagram. So it was a Russian military camp. But the reason that I put it out there is because I wanted to give you an illustration of how powerful and hypostatic symbols are. The very idea that we operate. I cite at the beginning of the book about 12 different authors that make a very strong case for that we think in symbolic fashion, that we are genetically hardwired to read the world symbolically. And it's for that reason that when we see symbols, we're able to have these multivalent associations, none of which are dismiss the other. So I don't say, oh, look, it's just a Soviet military camp, therefore expunge the notion of this satanic association. All of it is for consumption. All of it. I'm not here to criticize how you use it. In fact, I compel you to use a symbolic reading of the book. In fact, turn at any page, any page. You don't have to read it chronologically. Turn at any page, start here, and ask yourself, why is this here? Because I selected these images from about 15,000 images to select these particular images so as to appeal to the higher matrix of the way your mind works, so as for you to go in search of a deeper message. Isn't that what life is all about? I take my cue from the Hermetic philosopher named Marcelino Ficino, who believed that symbols were a guideway to higher reality, as were the artistic circle from Paris that I showed, and that I want you to use them and not be used by them. So the third question was
who's the guy running the show?
Right, the guy running the show, who I described as the Tom Brady of autocrats, is Nursultan Nazarbayev. So he is presently 70 years old. He's won every major election. He's been the first president, and he remains the president. He is kind of like, think of Washington, okay? No wrong can be thought of Washington. Well, he is a contemporary Washington, except he's written about 30 books, one related to architecture. He's a thinking man, but he grew up in very, very ignoble settings. He was a nomad, and he was born in a yurt, and he worked in a steel mill. And from working in a steel mill, he ended up graduating to becoming a representative of the Soviet Party. And from there, he just found his way. He's just got an innate genius for statecraft and politics. His name has recently come into the paper and the public eye from this uranium deal that the Clintons are involved in. And I wouldn't be surprised if it just, water off this guy's back. Yeah, I mean, it's not. He doesn't have a glorious human rights record, but most dictators don't.
Where was he educated? Like just at the steel mill? Wasn't formally? Okay, so yeah, all right. I was just wondering if he came out of some kind of institute that
Yeah, no. He was a very good student, and I think he had a year at a polytechnic in university in Karaganda, and then from there he just turned to politics. Now this guy has been. I witnessed his last election in Astana last year, and he won by an overwhelming 97%. And you would say, oh, that's because they totally rigged it and whatever. I'm like, no. I went out on the streets and I was like, who are you going to vote for? And they're like, well, this guy just won 4 Super Bowls. I think we're going to stay with him. So, and by the way, when he decided to move the capital from Almaty, the former capital, which was a Russian capital, to, quasi-Russian, to Astana, it was complete political suicide. Everyone was like, this is total hubris, visions of grandeur. And yet, this huge gamble really paid off. I mean, here we are talking about it.
Why do you call him dictator if 97% of population voted for him?
Well, I mean,
Saddam Hussein was dictator, and he killed 1 million people just because we called him. We decided. Who decides who is the dictator?
I should mention that I'm not saying dictator in a pejorative way. I'm actually am Platonic in my belief about having an enlightened philosopher king is sometimes better than democracy, but that's my opinion.
What's the population of the city today?
It's just over 1 million. Yeah, that city is 1 million people. Yep.
I took a small course and the guy was showing me the pentagram, that if you ran it the correct way, it will boost your energy.
Oh yeah.
And the same with the swastika. If it's going the correct way, you'll move forward in light. If you run them backward, you sort of end up in the form of depression, mental depression. So the man picks up those two, and yeah, we get labeled the Nazi swastika, like run backwards so you're depressed, and just my insight.
Were those from the rituals of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, by the way?
I don't know where he got his stuff. He was pretty bright, and everything that I left with was like, oh yeah, if you're doing it the right way, you will be smarter.
Somebody who hasn't asked a question, or go ahead, yes, sir.
I'm just curious, you mentioned earlier that you did an architectural presentation for the ambassador of Kazakhstan, or was
And
I'm just curious. So basically, when you said to him, "This is what you need,"
Yeah.
you're pretty much saying that I'm gonna fit a square peg in a round hole here. And after that, after all of this, what was his reaction to what you come up with?
Well, at the time, I was, I was, just throwing it out there, and he connected me with the state administration, which allows for a foreign scholarship. So, in Canada, we have something called a Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council Award that allows you to, as a scholar to investigate some subject. And there was a similar program in Kazakhstan. So he said, well, why don't you apply for this? And I did. And they said, okay, why don't you come for the national celebrations? And that was the first of 8 other visits that I made. And I have to say, when I first set out, I was rather, I'll say naive. I just thought, I had a bubbling academic intuition that there was a Rosetta Stone in Kazakhstan or in Astana, but it needed the right decoder. I wanted to be like the Champollion of Astana. But what I didn't realize is that when I participated in this exercise of doing research in the area and whatnot, I found myself into a kind of an interactive program where I wasn't going to decipher it. I realized that it was just the opposite side of the same coin. I would encode it. And in fact, it was much more fun and, I will argue, just as powerful. My point is this, is that by telling you I've written a foundation myth, most foundation myths have a single author. I mean, think of Homer and the Iliad, okay? Or Virgil and the Aeneid. What I'm presenting this in this book is that I say, even though I'm telling you up front this is a foundation myth, this does not dismiss the power of the text. All the elements that I've derived and footnoted can be sourced and cited. So I'm not just being purely inventive. As I mentioned, you need 3 basic ingredients for a foundation myth. You need some archaeology, something, some record. You need some form of monumental art or architecture, which will account for the symbol. And ultimately, you need a compelling narrative. And where I derived my compelling narrative happened much later. It was reading the Charles Williams, who was one of the Oxford Inklings, a lesser known of the Oxford Inklings. And I was reading one of his novels, and I just had this eureka where I was like, oh my gosh, why don't how could I even consider myself in the company of the great Inklings at Oxford, who met at the Eagle and Child pub, by the way? Like, can't even make this up. And I thought to myself, is it possible to do what they did for the 20th century and use not Frodo or Bilbo Baggins or the Quest of the Ring, but an entire real city? And my audience would be people that would study and look and interact with a real city. That part was unique. I didn't know it at the time. I was going to show you a video, and I wanted to create a chronology of this. I wanted to actually see, looking back, where I came from. And I was going to show you a video, which was the first video I produced after coming back from my first visit to Astana. I wanted to have some record, so I saw where was I and where was I going. And it's called the Astana Mystery. And in this 7-minute video, I basically describe, you know what, I have a hunch, a kind of like a Sherlock Holmesian sense that there's something here, but I just had no idea where it was going to take me. And I did this because I wanted to see the evolution of this idea. And I should mention that the second stage of my evolution of the idea is that I wanted to get the public to help me co-author this tale. I wanted it to be like a kind of a Wikipedia entry in the sense that anybody could offer their opinion. You think that it's the tree of life and the Sephiroth? Okay, you're entitled to make that. I didn't want to be this singular kind of like monolithic author. I wanted to say, okay, if I'm going to write a myth that touches upon everybody, and I use this this city, then I want the public to be invited into it. So I started a series of online webinars. I had 18 classes, and each one of these classes were divided into 3 different, it was a tripartite system of classes. And I started the first 2 classes, and I got such bozo madness that it was just nothing for me to deal with. And I realized that if I was going to do this effectively, I needed at least, a case study of about 5,000, 6,000 people participating. So I aborted that quickly and then said, okay, damn, I got to be the single author then. But no, initially I wanted to co-write the myth and invite you to help it. So instead, I took that in reverse by getting you to co-decipher the myth by having a secret message. Several people have made submissions, and it's just marvelous to see what has been coming through.
It's kind of like the hand.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Talk to the hand. Go ahead.
If I heard you correctly, you said that the Illuminati movement only lasted 9 years.
That is correct.
But my understanding is it went underground after that.
Okay, the question is that you said that the Illuminati only existed for 9 years, which is correct. They were officially dissolved in 1785, and that they went underground ever since. Do you know where we got this early beginning of fiction of the Illuminati? From 2 authors, John Robison and Abby Burrell, who in 1787 wrote the mother work of all tabloid journalism. Oh yeah, the Star derived, the very, very first bit of tabloid journalism revolved around the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati. And why? Well, because they set out to poison their political enemies. And there was a police raid on the Illuminati Lodge, And what they recovered were these seditious projects to overthrow government and offer this liberal, enlightened republic. And that the students of the Illuminati would go through these 3 grades. At the highest point, the Illuminati had about 3,500 members. But they were completely wiped out. And then just on the eve of when they were wiped out, you have the great period of 1789. Why is that such an important year? 1789, hello? Yeah, exactly. Chop off the head of the king, people. So, I mean, this moment, people were looking for how the heck could the most powerful nation on earth, France, lose their king? There must be some reason to it. And the first fingers were pegged on a totally ineffectual secret society, short-lived, called the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati, that went underground. And that story has stuck. The myth of the Illuminati is greater than the history. Hello? Get my point? The myth is greater than the history.
So I was just reading the other night online about all the present-day Illuminati members, including, you know, the Queen of England, Prince William, many kings and queens of the royal houses in Europe.
Sourced by who? You see, because what happens is that somebody makes this assertion, and then 50,000 other people recycle that assertion. That doesn't mean it's true. I use this as a point of illustration. If you want to study the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati, the origins of the Illuminati, you need to go to Ingolstadt. And when you're in Ingolstadt, go to the Stadtmuseum. And when you're there, please ask to look at the original writings. And when you're there, and hopefully you can read German, then, which most people that write on the Illuminati know no German, so it's like, how the hell are you? It's like writing about Kabbalah and not knowing Hebrew. No, you are forbidden. You can't talk about Kabbalah if you don't know how to read Hebrew. It's just like first point of entry. So first point of entry to understanding the Illuminati is you have to read German. Okay? And then read German and look at the text and then follow the trail. You know, this is something that I would, it's a Renaissance maxim that I tell my students all the time, which is ad fontes. Go to the sources. Most people don't. And most works that comment on the Illuminati have 0 footnotes. And if you just look at their footnotes, they're all recycling one another. You know, you could imagine, I have a friend in this room that I'm going to mention this story. When there are maybe like 3 schools in North America, maybe 4, where you could read Sumerian. Now, why would anyone want to read Sumerian? To find out whether the Anunnaki actually seeded the human race, and that Zecharia Sitchin, who actually knows 0 Sumerian, and I think his Hebrew is probably suspect too, was reading, he offered not 1 citation in the book, because what you know is that we have archives of this material that are accessioned to the exact point. The Enuma Elish, accession number 54446. So you want to look at the Enuma Elish, go. I mean, in fact, here, the adjacent building in Bancroft, like hopefully it's still there, are the royal inscriptions of, what is it called, of Babylon? Royal Inscription Library, right? It's still there. Yes, it's still there. And so if you want to find out about the Anunnaki, you can go and find the actual accession number, but no one includes that. Don't you think that's an important thing? You'd include, no, I want to know what the source is that is the derivation of this idea. I don't say this dismissively. I'm saying this as a way of the mystery is much deeper when you explore it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm hoping you could just remind me of the architect. I think it's the architect, or if it was just a designer. You put up the World Expo photo, and then you followed with a black and white drawing of the giant sphere. in which there was actually floating objects. I'm not really clear on the words, but the design itself is highly simple.
Yeah.
It just mimicked the World Expo, which is kind of giant.
Yeah.
You did list the name of the stylist, but I can't remember what that name was.
The what?
Of that black and white image that you put up.
Black and white image.
You did mention it. You did mention the name.
The two interlocking circles?
No, not the
Okay, so the World Expo, I don't think I mentioned the architect. That's Adrian Smith. Yeah, Chicago-based architect. And then this.
It was near the end.
Yeah, it kind of was. It was just a very simple document.
Oh, sorry. Etienne Louis Boulet. He was a French architect of the 18th century who was inspired by the precepts of Freemasonry and the idea that geometry could be instituted to regenerate society. And in particular, he is one of the fathers of a school of architectural thought called architecture parlante, or architecture that speaks, that the buildings should speak their function. Today we have the modernist manifesto, form follows function. For Boulet, it's like, no, the form should illustrate its function. So he would, along with Claude Nicolas Ledoux, they were like brothers on this, would design buildings like a brothel in the shape of a penis. Why? I mean, hey, the form should speak the function. Okay.
Do you think that the Bitcoin, like, mimic the rules and regulations and the prices from Kazakhstan?
No, no. That it's a completely decentralized market. So the Bitcoin price is determined by any other market value people are willing to pay for it. But what Astana wants to do at the World Expo site is to create a place to regulate, because right now it's completely unregulated, right? I mean, Chicago has recently stepped in to do futures on Bitcoin, maybe other cryptos, but I don't know. But Astana wants to lead the cryptocurrency revolution. Regulate it, have a system of taxation for it, every other thing, to get it outside of this kind of web of nerd money or money that is used for illicit purposes.
Two questions. One is George Washington wrote a letter about the Illuminati.
That's correct.
That he believed that it
He did believe
penetrated the U.S. and that it caused the French
true.
Revolution. Why would he believe that
And
if
he
it
believed
wasn't?
it was
Was he
on
just
his
kind
own.
of believing in the tabloids of the time? Is what you're
No, he had read John Robinson's books called The Proofs of a Conspiracy, which is a rather lengthy tome, and I would suggest you go there. He makes a very compelling case. So yeah, this is correct. Just because Washington believed it was so doesn't mean it was so. But these were works, by the way, when I say tabloid journalism, I'm not talking about like the Sun. Tabloid journalism in the 18th century is like 700 pages. Okay. Yeah, I mean we lost something in.
Second question?
Yeah.
How'd you get into this? This is such a this whole kind of study of symbolism and whatnot.
Well, it happened by sheer accident. Maybe 15 years ago, I was driving down a familiar street in Winnipeg that I'd seen many, many times before, and there's a building there called the Manitoba Legislative Building, and out of the corner of my eye, I spotted that it was flanked by 2 Egyptian sphinxes, and I simply parked my car, looked up, and tried to answer the riddle of the Sphinx. And that took me 3 graduate degrees in 10 years.
Okay, everyone, I just want to make sure we have enough time for you guys to all meet Frank, shake his hand, and he'll be signing books. I just wanted to remind you that he will be signing books, and we have all his books here for sale, and they'll make really great gifts for this holiday season. And maybe we'll take one last question, and then move on to
Somebody who hasn't asked a question, go ahead. Yeah, I mean, The question was, I mean, maybe I'm using the Illuminati as a toponym in the wrong way, and that there are, don't get me wrong, are there controlling groups of minority members that are operating in secret and moving world affairs? Of course. Whether they were involved in the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati? Not. I mean, it's like, it's similar to people that say, oh yeah, Aleister Crowley was, a great student of Jewish mysticism. I was like, no, he didn't read Hebrew, so he wasn't. So, and in this case, the question is, yes, are there bankers that are, I mean, didn't we just experience that in 2007? I mean, it was quite obvious that there are controlling powers, and the bank is probably the most hideous of the lot. And for the first time, maybe I'm being too naive about it, but I think for the very first time in forever that the bank has a formidable foe, and it is called cryptocurrency. I really believe that.
These shootings and bombings we've seen, do you believe that they are crisis drills make it look real?
I don't know. I study architecture and symbols of secret societies.
She was at the JFK thing. She was one of the first female in the U.S. Yeah, and she was at the 50th anniversary there. Judith Baker, Jim Mars. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
All the last books in Astana.
Yeah, it's fascinating. The whole Masonic architecture and the Renaissance.
But the rest is radial, according and axial, according to the path of the sun.
Where is that?
That's the signature, and then he's just rocking the Roman numeral date, which just shows how classy he is. Yeah, fantastic. Like even the cardstock, the quality of the paper, it's exceptional. And then of course, just all the imagery and the thoroughness of the explanation behind it all. It's just, I'm super happy to have this.
Thanks for coming.
Kind of